Hey, welcome back. Sorry for the abrupt ending at the end of part two there. Hadn't looked at kept my eye on the running time there. So, just to recap just a bit here. Yeah, Hinduism included this idea and belief in universal determinism. This is largely characterized or expressed through the idea of karma, where suffering and joy were tied to an individual's past actions. So that, and because Hinduism believes in the process of reincarnation, this means that if you were good and lived a moral kind of golden rule like type of lifestyle in one capacity or in one lifetime, that you would be rewarded with in a succeeding lifetime after reincarnation. Conversely, if you were uh, you know, greedy or exhibited kind of immoral behavior, that you would be punished in future lifetimes uh, after reincarnation. And this would be also characterized through the kind of succeeding life, where if you were lived a human existence in one life, that this would be a reward. If you lived were reincarnated as some other life form or creature, then this meant that you were being could be uh, being punished or what have you. The Vijayanagara Empire was also characterized by its implementation of the Nayaka state system. This is a power sharing kind of structure between imperial centralization on the one hand and a high degree or substantial degree of local autonomy on the other. Military chiefs governed smaller provinces within the broader empire itself. They were usually drawn from a merchant warrior class. So you have kind of this melding of political and commercial interests into a single entity of these governors, and they were able to attain and retain a high degree of cultural and political authority. So that was an immediate threat, a immediate neighboring threat to the uh, Mughal Empire itself. The Mughal Empire also had to deal with more distant threats, and those are mainly coming from European exploration. Um, that the again, when Vasco da Gama makes landfall in or arrives in the Indian subcontinent and just at the tail end of the 15th century. From that point on, there would be an increasing amount of European presence felt more consistently, and so much so, but that by 1510, Portuguese settlers, merchants, traders in Goa would be kind of the norm. And in future generations and future centuries, specifically as early as the 17th century, the 1600s, the Portuguese, as their influence began to decline, they would be replaced by English and Dutch merchants. So there's going to be this ever present and increasingly kind of uh, interventionary element from Europe moving forward, that the Mughal Empire, virtually the Vijayanagara, and any other empires, primarily in the Eastern sphere, were going to have to contend with and deal with. So this would bring a new dynamic to balances of power within the Indian subcontinent itself, that in many cases Europeans use access to these world's markets in order to enhance their own power and status. And also to enhance, as I kind of alluded to with the imperial competition from last lecture, they would enhance their own standing within the kind of continental workings of balances of power within Europe itself. Oftentimes, Europeans could do this by playing regional indigenous powers off against each other. In this case, in this dichotomy, this bipolarity between the Vijayanagar and the Mughal Empire. You have a natural kind of split occurring that the Europeans could turn to their advantage, and basically maneuver and negotiate the best terms of some sort of trade agreement to suit their own purposes. Indigenous powers did the same in their local, within their states, within their local balances of power. This kind of effort at the um, Nayaka within the Vijayanagara Empire is a pretty good example of that. To begin to wrap things up here, we'll turn attention to Japan to close out this lecture. So, as I mentioned at the outset, you had in Japan what a period known as the Warring States period, which roughly was lasting from about 1467 to 1568, in which there would be a host of competing warlords that would hold domain over, kind of provinces or smaller, wealthier estates. This is more of akin to kind of a feudal-like organization of political power, if you wanted to kind of characterize it in a Western context. Uh, Authority was in the hands of local level daimyo, as they were known, or feudal lords. They were responsible for serving as not only the economic authority, but also the political and military authority as well. And they used a class known as the samurai as their enforcers of authority, a professional warrior class that lay at the heart of this whole structure. Throughout the Warring States period, however, any authority was highly contested. Not only the strong survived kind of mentality, there was a good deal of betrayal and treachery that took place. So, loyalty was, in essence, the highest virtue that could be won and retained. And because of that, you have this very kind of unstable, contentious type of atmosphere during this century plus period in Japanese history. Effective leaders were and could and did create fortified towns, and over time, the daimyo were able to learn to keep the samurai close at hand in order to ensure their loyalty and minimize any types of potential political plots to overthrow the daimyo. This allowed the samurai to focus on military matters, um, and not having to tend to large estates or kind of managerial matters. So, almost as an alternative to the land grant system that we talked about at the outset with the in the Ottoman experience, where military veterans are being rewarded with land, or kind of closely associated the conquistadors in the New World being rewarded with land. In the Japanese experience here, we see something quite different. That the samurai are not necessarily having to become familiar with political and administrative operations and capabilities and matters. That was still the sphere of the daimyo. Instead, the samurai themselves were an elite warrior class, and that they were solely focused on mastering the art of war. Those daimyo that were particularly adept and accomplished as administrators um, could exhibit that through tax collection, being very efficient, and that they would be able to cultivate a good sense of civic operation, um, which would overall add to the kind of capabilities of their domains themselves. Towards the tail end of this feudal like period of Japanese history, several of the daimyo began to grow more powerful than others. That power and wealth begins to coagulate, begins to consolidate itself into the hands of a governing elite. One of those individuals to emerge in this late Warring States period was a man by the name of Oda uh, Nono- Nobunaga, who was able to conquer the old capital of Japanese capital at Kyoto, and in essence, unify power over the central region of Japan itself. The city of Nagasaki was opened to foreign trade um, in and around this period of time. It was a small fishing village that was transformed almost overnight into a thriving commercial port. And again, this was largely as a result of contact from outside, primarily Western Europe. Portugal established first contact in 1542 or 1543. They brought with them technology like the musket, gunpowder, and with that, this was an advantage that daimyo began to deploy on the battlefield soon thereafter in order to gain an advantage over, um, competitive warlord rivals. Uh, Not only was there the importation of technology, but of course there would be the importation of culture and ideas, philosophy, and religion itself. The Jesuit missionary Francis Xavier introduced Christianity to Japan. What's interesting in this experience is that um, Christianity struggled to thrive within Japan itself. Now, there's a very small community of Japanese Christians that even exists today, um, but the Japanese culture, the Japanese people, continued in many respects to adhere to more the more ancient practice of Shintoism. This is a blending of early Japanese religion, um, having embracing a devotion to nature as well as physical and ritualistic purity. So it is kind of an amalgamation of the natural world combined with meditative like characteristics of kind of inner, again, enlightenment and tranquility. Uh, Shintoism also was established on principles of modern, or excuse me, I should say, origin mythology. This is where believers of Shintoism adhered to the idea that the sun goddess, the Japanese sun goddess, Amaterasu, Omikami, and her descendants uh, were the predecessors, the ancestors of the imperial family of Japan itself. And so this was a kind of internal, a domestic, religious, philosophical, mythological type of expression of faith within Japan. Um, it should also be noted that when Buddhism began to expand across the Far East, it also made its way into Japanese culture. So there was an element of Buddhism that also was expressed throughout much of the countryside of early modern Japan. So again, it was the religious composition of Japan was becoming, kind of increasingly diversified during this period of time. But it's important to understand, specifically with regard to something like Shintoism, that this would form and have a pretty um, significant impact on the development of modern Japan itself, even into the 20th century. As we turn attention towards the end of this course, in how and why the state went to war in World War II, um, which we should be able to get to. In 1582, Nobunaga was killed. He was assassinated by a disgruntled subordinate, a general of his. When that happened, you have his successor, Totomi Hideyoshi, succeeding Nobunaga. And it was Hideyoshi that was able to consolidate political control. In 1587, Hideyoshi managed to banish the Portuguese. Um, he proclaimed this, but a decade passed before it was actually um, implemented, before it was actually enforced. Uh, from 1592 to 1597, uh, Hideyoshi would go ahead and engage in organizing and launching two separate invasions of the Korean Peninsula. This is due perhaps in part to fulfill a need to keep the militant feudal lords, the subordinate daimyo, occupied with managing um, wartime planning, so that they would not turn their attention towards undermining Hideyoshi's authority. Japan initially requested passage through the Korean Peninsula to gain access to China and to attack China directly. But the Korean people opposed this Japanese request. And as a result, this meant that Japan just simply resorted to invading the Korean Peninsula. On both occasions, uh, both efforts to invade Korea ended in costly failures for Japan and for Hideyoshi and his legitimacy, his authority. In essence, it was a nightmare scenario for the Japanese. They ended up fighting not only the Koreans, but also the Koreans resorted to inviting the Chinese into the peninsula in order to help defend the peninsula against the Japanese aggressors. Again, this marks a trend, you could argue, in Japan's expansion and episodes in efforts to expand in and throughout its modern history. Again, up until 1945. In 1598, Hideyoshi died, and 2 years later, in the year 1600, we see the ascent, the um, imposition of what becomes known as the Tokugawa era, as you can see, lasting for in excess of 250 years. This comes about in the year 1600 when the Tokugawa Ieyasu comes to power. He becomes and takes the title shogun, which was, or roughly translates as generalissimo. This was the highest military office within the Tokugawa system that would begin to quickly take shape once Tokugawa Ieyasu took control. Tokugawa himself would be the head of the central administration of the new formation of the state. So we'll turn attention to aspects of the Tokugawa era, its characteristics, in future lectures. But in order to kind of draw these threads together and to conclude this lecture, you can see here that these various regions across much of the face of the earth, in Africa, the Middle East, India, and Japan, they give us a sense of the factors that would come to dominate global affairs, especially in the modern era. We're beginning to lay out the pieces, if you will, on the map, where Africa, in many cases, you can begin to see was a complex and diverse continent, brimming with potential, with natural resources, and it was provided a circumstances in which Africa drew a lot of attention as a result of these kinds of converging characteristics. Again, this was not always for the better. As other areas of the world, Europeans, probably chiefly among them, are going to begin to want to exploit this latent wealth within the entirety of the continent, the massive continent that is Africa. The Ottomans too also wished to try and leave their own mark and influence, specifically, of course, in North Africa itself. In the Middle East, vibrant empires like the aforementioned Ottoman Empire um, was a beneficiary of lying at a geopolitical crossroads between the Asian continent and Europe, and also you could say Africa as well. But because of its geography, because of its location at these crossroads, it made for um, a difficult enforcement of any type of political order or cohesive administration. The Ottoman state was in a good position early on to begin to try and manage and police this area, which it did to a certain degree of effectiveness. But as we'll see, moving into as even as early as the 19th century, if not earlier, or the Ottoman state was already beginning to wither in many cases. Um, so, uh, because of the constant attention being paid to, fending off both internal insurrection and any type of foreign threats, India, for its experiences, suffered from some of the same kinds of maladies. It was home to potent religions, again, Hinduism um, and Buddhism being two chief belief systems among them. It was also a leading advocate for the spread of Islam and the adoption of Islamic principles. Um, but again, with things like the Vijayanagara Empire and the Mughal Empire, there was political inconsistency, which created a persistent sense of friction and instability. Again, that could be exploited by outsiders. In this case, again, European interests. And much the same could be said for Japan. That Japan, here we see this transition, this pivot from the warring states area towards this more centralized control at the dawn of the Tokugawa era, in which we see a slow kind of consolidation of power. And what we'll see time and again within the Japanese experience is this effort to recognize the potential threat that was coming from outside influence, primarily again European in orientation, and how Japan was going to uh, not follow in the footsteps of, say, China, that had basically shut itself off or turned away completely from the outside world. But with Japan, it was more an effort to, at all times, try and retain the initiative when it came to grappling or dealing with the rest of the world. That how was Japan going to, on the one hand, keep the perceived threats of the world at bay, while at the same time preserving Japan's ability to interact with the rest of the world on its own terms, and to varying degrees of success and failure, Japan is going to have to navigate that ground. Um, and so, in this case, what you see at the dawn of the Tokugawa era is this idea of, you know, the world's coming at us, and we're going to have to deal with that. One way that we are going to deal with that is to begin to consolidate control. And Tokugawa Ieyasu is going to be in the right place at the right time when it comes to um, taking control and having power consolidated in his hands. So that's where we are here at the close of this lecture. This gets us to the end of the first kind of component here in week one. Again, there are some materials located within this folder, regional actors and their influence, that documentary regarding the Ottomans. There's also a brief article regarding a more recent controversy. This is from dating back a couple years, with regard to India and its name. That was kind of a brief kind of dust up on the international stage. Whether to use India's name as India or kind of more of a Hinduist expression of the state of India itself during at a conference that uh, Prime Minister Modi was hosting in India, um, which gets you again to notions of identity and naming rights or references. Okay. Um, Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You can reach me via email, which is in the syllabus, or kind of um, post a message on Blackboard. I'll be keeping up with that throughout the week and throughout the weeks ahead. All right. Take care. See you in the next module next week.